The third period bell was supposed to signal the halfway point to lunch, the slow crawl toward freedom. But today it was different. An ear-splitting alarm, not the familiar melodic chime, ripped through the air. It was the lockdown bell. We'd practiced this drill a dozen times. Lights off, lines down, huddle against the far wall, stay silent. Mr. Harrison, our usually laid-back history teacher, sprang into action with a speed I'd never seen. His face was pale, his hands shaking slightly as he fumbled with the keys to lock the door. He flicked off the lights, and we were plunged into near-total darkness, the only light filtering from the emergency sign in the hallway. We scrambled, a mess of limbs and whispered apologies, to the corner of the room, away from the door and the thin glass panel beside it. "It's just a drill," someone whispered. But it didn't feel like a drill. Mr. Harrison's face, a ghostly mask in the gloom, told a different story. His eyes were wide, fixed on the door. He pressed a finger to his lips, a silent, desperate plea for absolute quiet. The silence that followed was heavier than any I'd ever known. It was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Every tiny sound was amplified, the nervous shuffle of someone's sneakers, a stifled cough, the frantic thumping of my own heart against my ribs. I could hear the girl next to me, Sarah, trying to muffle her sobs into the sleeve of her sweater. Outside in the hallway, the world was unnervingly quiet. No announcements, no chatter, just the lingering echo of that terrible alarm. We were a frozen tableau of fear, 28 students and one teacher, huddled in the dark, waiting for a signal that it was all over. But the minutes stretched into an eternity. 5 minutes, 10. My legs started to cramp, but I didn't dare move. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and a wave of panic washed over me. I fumbled to silence it, my fingers clumsy with dread. A text from my mom. "Are you okay? I saw the news. The news." This wasn't a drill. This was real. A cold dread, sharper and more potent than anything I'd ever felt, settled deep in my stomach. Then we heard it, a sound from far down the hall. A rhythmic, heavy thud. Thump, thump. It was slow at first, almost methodical. Then it was joined by a voice. A raw, guttural scream that didn't sound human. It was pure rage, a torrent of garbled words and animalistic snarls that echoed through the empty corridor. The sound was getting closer. Thump, thump, thump. It was the sound of something heavy hitting the classroom doors. One after another. A fist, a foot, something else. The screaming grew louder, clearer. "I know you're in there." The voice was shredded, torn with a fury I couldn't comprehend. "Come out, you little rats." Each slam on a nearby door sent a fresh wave of terror through our huddled group. Sarah's muffled sobs turned into quiet, hitched breaths of panic. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying, bargaining with a God I wasn't even sure I believed in. Please, just let him skip our room. Please, let him pass. The thudding stopped right outside our door. The silence was suddenly worse than the noise. We held our breath, a collective silent gasp. I could feel the vibrations through the floor as he stood there, right on the other side of that thin wooden door. I imagined him listening, just as we were. Listening for a whisper, a sob, a single sign of life. My heart was a drum solo against my ribs, so loud I was sure he could hear it. Then the handle rattled, violently. A frantic, desperate jiggling that seemed to shake the entire doorframe. It held. Mr. Harrison had locked it. A guttural growl of frustration echoed from the hallway. And then a colossal bang. The door shuddered as if hit by a battering ram. Bang, again. Splinters of wood flew inward from the frame. Sarah let out a small, terrified squeak, and a boy near me clamped his hand over her mouth, his own eyes wide with horror. "I see you," the voice shrieked, and my blood ran cold. The window. The small, reinforced glass panel next to the door. He was looking through it. Bang. Another impact, this one followed by the sickening sound of cracking wood. The door was breaking. I could see a sliver of hallway light pierce the darkness near the lock. He was going to get in. This was it. This was how it ended, in a dark history classroom on a Tuesday afternoon. I risked a glance at Mr. Harrison. He was standing now, his back pressed against the wall next to the door. In his hand, he held the heaviest thing in the room, the old metal fire extinguisher from its bracket on the wall. He held it like a club, his knuckles white, his jaw set. His eyes, fixed on the splintering door, were no longer just scared. There was something else there, a fierce, protective resolve. He was a man preparing to defend his students, to stand between us and the monster in the hall. He was ready to fight. The thought was both terrifying and strangely comforting. The door groaned, its hinges screaming in protest. With one final deafening crash, the lock mechanism gave way and the door flew open, slamming against the interior wall. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, framed by the harsh fluorescent light of the hall. He was a whirlwind of frantic energy, tall and gaunt, his clothes disheveled. His face was a contorted mask of pure, unadulterated rage, his eyes wild and unfocused. He held a metal pipe in one hand, slick with something dark. For a heart-stopping second, he just stood there, his chest heaving, his gaze sweeping across the darkened room. His eyes hadn't adjusted yet. He couldn't see us huddled in the corner. It was our only advantage. That single, precious second of darkness. Before the intruder could take another step, Mr. Harrison lunged from the shadows. He moved with a desperate, explosive force, swinging the heavy fire extinguisher in a wide, powerful arc. The sound was sickening, a wet, percussive crack that echoed in the sudden silence. The intruder crumpled to the floor without a sound, a heap of tangled limbs in the doorway. He didn't move. Mr. Harrison stood over him, breathing in ragged, heavy gasps. The fire extinguisher still held aloft, ready to strike again. But he didn't need to. The man was down. For a moment, nobody moved. The only sound was our teacher's ragged breathing and the distant, approaching wail of sirens. Mr. Harrison slowly, shakily, lowered the extinguisher. He stumbled back against the wall, sliding down to the floor, his face buried in his hands. The room erupted. Sobs turned into loud, unrestrained wails. People were crying, shaking, hugging the person next to them. I just sat there, frozen, staring at the figure on the floor and the man who had saved us. The sirens grew louder and louder, a sound that had never been more welcome. Police in heavy tactical gear swarmed the hallway, their voices sharp and commanding. "Clear! Room is clear!" They led us out, one by one, through the hallway. It was a war zone. Other classroom doors were splintered, lockers were dented, and the air was thick with the smell of fear and adrenaline. We were herded into the gymnasium, where other classes were already gathered, a sea of pale, tear-streaked faces. Parents were rushing in, a flood of frantic relief and anguish. I saw my mom and ran into her arms, burying my face in her shoulder, and finally let myself break down completely. We were the lucky ones. The news reports later would call Mr. Harrison a hero. They would detail how the intruder, a former student with a history of severe mental health issues, had been failed by the system. But for us, the students of room 204, those facts were just background noise. What we would remember forever was the darkness. We would remember the silence, the sound of a fist on a door, the splintering wood, and the terrifying guttural screams. The school reopened 2 weeks later. It was scrubbed clean, the broken doors replaced. They offered counselors and held assemblies about unity and resilience, but nothing was the same. The hallways felt different, haunted. Every unexpected noise made me jump. Every time the classroom door closed, my heart would leap into my throat. We all looked at Mr. Harrison differently. He was quieter now, the easygoing humor gone from his eyes, replaced by a permanent shadow. He was our hero, but he was also a man who had been forced to do something terrible to protect us, and we could all see the toll it had taken. Sometimes when the classroom is quiet, I can still hear it, the thumping in the hall, the rattling handle, the scream. It's a ghost that walks the halls of my memory, a permanent reminder of the day our school became a nightmare, a day that taught me that the real monsters are not make-believe and that sometimes safety is just a locked door that might not hold.